Happy New Year, and welcome back to spring semester. I appreciate you all coming out for this opportunity and this faculty meeting today. I know that some of us aren't officially back at work yet, so I really appreciate your efforts. And I hope those of you who aren't here physically or attending virtually, we will be recording it also and send the link to the recording back out. The PowerPoint that President Nolan will be operating from today was sent out this morning, and it is corrected from the draft we sent out yesterday. And it's also available on the Faculty Senate website. So I'm going to turn it over to President Nolan, and thank you all for being here.
Dr. Foley, thank you. And I want to echo the sentiments of appreciation for everyone coming out on this balmy Thursday to be a part of what I hope is a conversation. We shared slides in advance of today to provide a point of context. I'm not going to discuss every slide in detail, but the purpose of the material is to frame background for conversations that we've had as a university over the course of the past couple of years and that we'll have throughout the 2015 calendar year as we move through a landscape that's continuing to change around us. The PowerPoint is, it'd be helpful if I had the clicker. This is a big screen. Someone joked earlier about lots of small numbers and that way no one can see what you're talking about. But when a screen's this big, everything's going to show up. But what I'd like to do is to walk through the following areas this afternoon. And I hope this truly can be a conversation. But I'd like to spend a little bit of time reflecting upon our existing strategic planning efforts, to provide some explanation of the data that's contained within the slides, to talk about some of the emerging public policy priorities that are occurring on campus, to discuss how the paradigm around us is changing, and then to do a deep dive on some specific issues that are impacting the campus as we prepare for the start of the semester. These are our longstanding institutional values. I'm not going to go into them, but I always like to start presentations by putting the values of the university at the onset of the slides because it reminds us of why we're here. It reminds us of the agreed upon principles that we of a university community that we engage upon each day. So people come first. Relationships are built on honesty, integrity, and trust. Diversity of people and thought is respected. And we have a commitment to intellectual achievement and that it's embraced. But those values, this concept of a mission, runs consistent from our founding. I have some quotes behind me of Dr. Gilbreth, first president of the institution, who very early on put the notion of regional service first and foremost as the mission of the institution. An institution that has evolved in many respects to become the land-grant university of Appalachia. I spent some time earlier this week going back and rereading some historical pieces about the institution. We talk a great deal about working with our students and assisting students outside of the classroom. And I was struck by a committee that was one of the first committees formed on campus, and it was the Housing Committee. And the members of the Housing Committee in the fall of 2012 met our students at the train station, escorted them to their residences across Johnson City, and then throughout the academic year checked in with the landowners of the residence to ensure that the students were well behaved and that they were studying in the evenings. So this concept of student support has been with us since 1912, and it traces its roots to the Housing Committee that was formed by President Gilbreth. But that bottom note, that we're a beacon of social and cultural education, that we're the engine of economic development. I've got a line that I like to use in many public addresses, that we're not a city on the hill, that we're the people who built the hill. We're the institution that quietly for 103 years has gone about serving the people of this region. And as I think we move through our strategic planning processes here in the next year, I'm pretty confident that we'll keep that notion of regional stewardship front and forward. Here are our strategic priorities for the current master plan. Here's a little bit of work, detail on the Committee for 125, which was formed 2 years ago to examine a vision for the institution as we acknowledge the centennial and we're preparing for our 125th anniversary. Everyone's well-versed on the work of the Committee for 125 and the issues that they examined. But these are some of the things that have moved forward from the committee's work. A focus on a culture of transparency. That's part of purpose of today. I've heard loud and clear from faculty and from staff throughout the fall that we need to improve communication across campus. And I hope that as we begin the 2015 calendar year, both from my office, deans, chairs, and all of us, that we make a commitment to communicating. I need to communicate the vision for the institution. We need to have a communication around consensus in terms of direction. But as an institution, if we're not communicating, challenges begin to unfold. And I pledge to everyone, both in the room and watching live on stream, that as we move through this year, that this is a year when we're going to do everything within our power to clearly communicate what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what we accomplished. And these are some of the accomplishments from the Committee for 125. Now I want to transition into some data points. I don't want to go into every slide in detail, and I want to pause at appropriate times to have a conversation. But every day I wake up and read the Chronicle. And when I opened up the email that's today's news from the Chronicle, there was a reference to a Standard & Poor's article. So I quickly plowed through that article, and you see a quote from the findings of the Standard & Poor's report. The full information is available on the Chronicle. But the takeaway for me from that report is the quote in italics. It's our belief, Standard & Poor's, the bond rating agency, that colleges or universities that are unable to distinguish themselves in the market through their reputation or offerings will have to compete for students purely on price, which will weaken demand and possibly cut into their enrollment over time. Last year, it was Moody's casting a negative budget forecast for post-secondary education. All of this, from my perspective, is a reflection that the long-standing social compact that America has had with her colleges and universities has eroded. 40 years ago, 60 cents on the dollar of what it took to run the lights in this building was provided by the taxpayers of the state of Tennessee. Now, more than 65 cents on the dollar of the light bill that's running as we currently speak is provided by student-generated revenues. We've thrown the notion of a social compact with higher education out the door as higher education has shifted from a public good to a private good. And many faculty have said, well, you know, Dr. Nolan, you need to go to Nashville and bang the drums and try to reverse these trends. I think we would be better served to plan for the day in which we see our state support in the teens or in single digits, because that's the direction that we're headed. That's not a direction that I'm comfortable with, and it's difficult for me to stand in front of you and say that we're increasingly becoming more and more of a private institution, because all I know is public education. I went to public schools, I went to public universities, I've been chancellor of a public system. So to say that we're stepping back from a public commitment to higher education is painful, but all of the signs are indicating that state support for universities will continue to decline. And as we look forward, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to start to examine how we can diversify our revenues so that we are able to, in many respects, stand alone from the decisions that are made in Nashville and control our destiny. But you're seeing this across the state and across the country. This just isn't here. In Michigan, there are conversations around privatizing public campuses. We have a private element on our campus, the Bill Gatton College of Pharmacy, a private college on a public university. But as you look downfield, I think you'll see more states having conversations around releasing state institutions, particularly flagships, from state control. All of that is because of the chart behind me. You all have heard me talk about this before. SRAB is the Southern Regional Education Board. It's comprised of the member states of the SRAB, which is Delaware all the way down to Florida over to Texas. There's 16 states in the SRAB. What this chart shows is overall percent of funding from state and the percent trend over time. Tennessee is highlighted in the yellow. In 2000, more than 60 cents on the dollar to maintain the operations of state universities came from state resources. In 2011-12, that number had dropped to 39%. This chart breaks that out by state. You can see our percentages at the beginning of the 2000s, our percentages now. I draw your attention to the state of South Carolina. South Carolina, at the point of the initial benchmark, 65% of the overall operating revenues for places like Clemson, USC, USC Upstate, et cetera, came from the state. By 2012-13, 17 cents on the dollar was derived from state-generated resources. So the trends are not unique to us, but it's the manner in which the interplay between state appropriations and tuition and fees come together is something that is a little bit dynamic with respect to the comparison between Tennessee and South Carolina, and I'll show that in a few seconds. And a few seconds is now. What you see here is a column of state revenues, net tuition generated revenues, and total dollars per student. In the state of Tennessee, you see we have $8,201 per student generated from net tuition and fees, but look at South Carolina, $13,626. Many of you will remember the period in which tuition and fees at Clemson increased 40% and 40% on back-to-back years. I'm not standing here suggesting at all that we at ETSU are going to raise tuition and fees 40%, but the downstream consequences of the increased tuition and fee revenues that have been generated in South Carolina is that they have, on average, $3,000 more per student than we have. Where does that ripple? It ripples into faculty and staff salaries. So the point of all of this is no one element of this stands on its own. The interplay between state appropriations and tuition and fees is critical because that determines the revenue that we have to run the university, E&G operating expenses. And our E&G operating expenses rank 12th in the South. We've experienced a great deal of policy reform in the state of Tennessee. Policy reform that's not only been rapid in terms of the pace of change, but policy reform that's now, through the process of policy diffusion, replicating itself out across the country. There have been a number of articles in the Chronicle, references in the popular press to performance funding. Performance funding traces its roots originally to the state of Tennessee, to THEC, when in the mid-1970s the state received grant funding from the Ford Foundation to create an assessment-driven performance funding policy portfolio. We've now transitioned to what's called Performance Funding 2.0, in which 100% of the state appropriations are allocated based on performance metrics. But this stuff has happened fast. Complete College Tennessee was just in 2010. Drive to 55 is the current reform. But all of the reforms that are coming from Nashville, from my perspective, are focused on workforce development. They're focused on how do we increase educational attainment, but how do we produce graduates who are prepared to enter the workforce. I understand that, having worked in state capitals, but from my perspective, what's lost is the focus on student learning. What's lost is the focus on a university experience. And what's lost is the interplay between students and faculty that only occur in a classroom. There are differences between institutions. There's a difference between a community college and a university. Many times I fall into the trap of a 2-year college and a 4-year college. We're not a 4-year college, we're a university. And there's a difference between what happens in our classrooms and what happens in the classrooms at other campuses across the state. But that's gotten lost a little bit in this policy reform. But this is the policy reform that's driving the dynamics of change across the state. Here's the old formula. So for the better part of our professional lifetime, we were funded as an institution based upon enrollment. At the 14th day, the state took a snapshot of enrollment. That enrollment was then run through a formula that recognized the differential costs among programs, and a recommendation was presented to the General Assembly based upon students that were enrolled in courses. And you see the majority of that enrollment was majority of funding is on enrollment, 5.45% was on the assessment-oriented performance funding. Now 100% of the state appropriation is predicated on outcomes, but the percent in the maroon form there, the assessment-driven performance funding remains. Our outcome model essentially has a couple of basic parts. There is a premium for adult and low-income students, and as you can see from the third bullet, rather than counting enrollment, the Tennessee model just simply counts degrees. And these are the elements that are included within the formula. There's not a lot of moving parts here. This has been the impact of the shift to an outcomes-driven formula. The formula does not distribute new revenues. The formula redistributes the base. Some institutions have benefited more than others within the development of the new Performance Funding 2.0 outcomes-driven formula. Institutions are compared to one another, and dollars are allocated based upon outcomes. But there's not a zero start point. I'm going to simplify this. If Dr. Dula and myself are preparing for a standing broad jump competition, we each last year were able to jump 3 feet. If Dr. Dula, through whatever type of enhancements he was able to acquire, can next year jump 8 feet, and I can only jump 5, we both improved, but he improved at a much more significant clip than I. If that were moving through the formula, he would have received the new revenues. I would not receive the new revenues, even though both institutions improved. And you see that reflected here. The majority of institutions in the state have improved their graduation outcomes. They've improved the production of degrees. But some institutions saw quicker gains than others, hence you have a redistribution of the base. But you're redistributing a base that in many respects hasn't changed much over time. This chart, it's pretty busy, and I promise you I'm going to pause in a second for questions and for some conversation. But to me, this chart is important because it dispels the myths around escalating costs in higher ed. All of us receive questions from people at the grocery store, neighbors. Why is tuition out of control? Why are costs spiraling? What's driving the price increases in public universities across the nation? Every spring when institutions announce their fee increases, be it in the Washington Post, the New York Times, or the Tennessean, there'll be an article about price increases and out-of-control costs in higher education. But if you step back and look at this chart, what this chart shows is total dollars per student, that's FTE, full-time equivalent, adjusted for inflation. And if you go back to 1986, 1987, I was a freshman in college. So my freshman year in college, the universities in the great state of Tennessee had about $15,000 per student to run their operations. You now fast forward to 2013-14, and we still have right about $15,000 per student to run the institutions. It's not that costs are out of control. We've maintained that $15,000 threshold at the same point that we've generated smart classrooms, that we've wired buildings, that we've made wireless ubiquitous across campus. Technology has significantly increased the cost of education, but the total level of support stays right about $15,000. So from my perspective, we've been efficient. We've been wise stewards of the public resources, but what has fundamentally changed is the distribution of those revenues. So when I earlier made reference to a change in the social compact for higher education, that shift from green to red reflects that change in the social compact. Here's specific numbers to the trend lines. You can see in 2003-04, it was split right at about 50-50. $7,500 from tuition and fees, $7,400 from tuition and fees, $7,500 from state appropriations, and then by 13-14, you can put numbers on the red trend lines. Here's overall dollars for universities. East Tennessee State University, right after the Great Recession, had about $48 million in general state appropriations to run the university. We're right at about $48 million in 2013-14. So state support has remained relatively consistent, even though enrollment during that time period has increased. This is reference material. One of the things that I really wrestle with is the lack of one place to get my hands on data. So my hope is that through this PowerPoint presentation, you have one source of information that provides you with rich data on funding, tuition and fees, graduation rates, et cetera. These are non-formula units. There are some elements in the portfolio of higher education in the state of Tennessee that are not funded through the formula, i.e. College of Medicine, Ag, the Craft Center at Tennessee Tech. So these are the formula units, and these are the elements that are not funded through the formula. But those are every single, these represent each single line item in the budget that supports post-secondary education in the state of Tennessee. Now I want to step away from Tennessee and compare us to peers. We do a lot of in-state comparisons. We compare ourselves to UT institutions. We compare ourselves to TBR institutions. But I don't think those are fair comparisons. Our mission is distinctive from the mission of Tennessee Tech. Our mission is distinctive from the mission of Austin Peay or Memphis. The institutions that are behind me are institutions of similar mission complexity, similar degree portfolios, similar academic offerings. So as we look at comparisons both in terms of support, salaries, retention rates, et cetera, I think there's a lot of meaning to examining peers. So these are our 20 peer institutions, and you can see total dollars per student, ETSU for 2012-13, and that's the most recent available data from IPEDS, the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, which is the federal portfolio that captures comparable peer data. Not always accurate, but it's the data that we have to work with. We have $11,673 per student, which puts us in the bottom third of our peers. But this is a point that you all have brought clear to me from the moment that I had the honor to interview for this job. Our faculty salaries on campus are not where they should be. Salaries across the board on our campus are not where they should be. I'm going to talk in a little bit about a number of committees that are examining our budget processes, that are examining opportunities for efficiency, that are researching issues of our degree portfolios. Because if you just simply look at two statistics, and I'm going to oversimplify this, when we have $11,673 per student, you would anticipate that our faculty salaries would be somewhere right around 15 if our total dollars per student are right around 15. But if you look at our faculty salaries in comparison to peers, we're either 18 or 19 across each of these elements. We didn't get into this situation overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. Folks have asked, well, Dr. Nolan, where are we spending our money? What are we doing differently than other universities? Much of this is emerging through the work of committees that are being chaired by Dr. Bach, Dr. Foley, and Dr. Calhoun. But my evaluation of what we're doing differently than other institutions is we're focusing on our mission. Our mission is to serve the people of Appalachia. And if you look at and examine the elements that we as a university operate in service to the people of Appalachia, in many respects, we're running a land-grant institution without the land-grant funding. So some could assert, and we'll work through this as we continue our evaluations of where those resources are expended, that much of the reason for the level of faculty salaries is that we are directing resources towards things that are public service related and related to making a difference in the community. But these are things as a campus that I would like for us to investigate together as we make a transition to potentially a new budget process for the university. I'm going to pause here before transitioning into a conversation around tuition and fees, affordability, et cetera. But questions, thoughts, observations, reflections on the data that I've presented thus far, which is an examination of mission, an examination of state resources, and a very quick overview of the funding formula in the state of Tennessee. Dr. Dooley.
College of Medicine faculty salaries included in that average?
The College of Medicine faculty salaries are included in AAUP.
They're a separately funded unit of because my salary as an assistant professor is substantially than our own average. And I would think that's a lot of the case that you see some skew in that probably because we have different abilities to pay faculty based on demand and resources which are differential compared to other units in
Correct.
colleges.
We've spent a consultant who's helping us unbundle our finance data has spent more than a year and a half attempting to unbundle the data that's provided from the College of Medicine, Pharmacy, et cetera, that gets rolled up into submissions to IPEDS and aggregated into submissions to AAUP. Even when we have unbundled, and I did not present the unbundled data because it does not allow me peer comparisons. That's something we had to dig into on our own. But even when we unbundle and we've made comparisons to institutions of similar mission complexity, we'll say Marshall, and I've been able to do some things with Marshall because of my former role, our salaries are still below those of other institutions when we unpackage or unbundle the salaries from medicine. Dr. Pat.
Are these annualized to 11 months, or are they 9 months?
These are 12-month salaries. And this is what's reported by AAUP. So the data source here is AAUP. This is AAUP's reporting of faculty salaries. Last year's the most recent year that data is available. They usually release new data in the spring. One of the things that we've wrestled with in these committees, I'm a data person, I wrestle with as well, is the desire to have perfect data. You're going to see that much of this data isn't perfect. We could spend 2 years trying to comb this down to an infinite level. But the reason I'm showing this is because these are the data that individuals external to the universities evaluate us by. So if I'm a faculty member looking at making an investment in ETSU and calling this my home, these are the data that I'm going to pull. They may not be perfect for us, they may not be perfect for the other universities, but it's the only data that we have that's comparable.
Do we know what the full impact of Tennessee Promise is going to be yet, and how it's going to affect tuition and funding at this institution?
Dr. Bitter, I have some slides in a little bit that will talk about Promise. Our projections have indicated, Mike and I, Dr. Hoff and I have two different projections. His projection is about an 8% decrease in our freshman enrollment. My projection is about a 10. So let's just split the difference and call it 9. If we see a 9% reduction in the size of our freshman class, that's about 180 students. Each one of those students generates about $8,000 in tuition revenue. So that could give you a sense of the loss of revenue because of Promise. But then that does not account for intentional initiatives that we have implemented to try to offset that loss. In terms of state appropriations, given that Promise is linked to the cost of attendance at a community college, I do not feel it's a jump to assume that as we move forward, there's going to be a lot of pressure to provide financial assistance in terms of state support to continue to hold the cost of Promise at an affordable level. Those are all policy conversations as a state that we've yet to have. Anyone think I'm out in left field? Am I looking at this concept of a changing social compact in a direction that you look at otherwise? Does anyone feel that I'm false in my statement that I think it's within our best interest to begin to plan for the day in which we as an institution have less than 20 cents on our overall operating support provided by the state? Anyone disagree with that? Because this is one of the elements I'd like to have a conversation around.
I didn't want to disagree with you, that's why I put my hand back down. But the question you mentioned going towards almost a privatized model. I know that a lot of the stuff that comes from the state usually has some sort of string attached or things like that. And I grew up in an area, western Pennsylvania, and there's Grove City College, which back in the 70s decided to just, they're done with everybody. And they wouldn't even accept money from the federal government for grants or whatever. And because they did that, even though they lost money initially, they wound up coming out so far ahead that they're still considered the best buy in education on cost, because even though they don't take any, you can't get a federal grant and go there with paid tuition, because they don't take that money because Title IX and other things. But that because of all that extra stuff that gets, the strings that are attached to that money, they have been able to hold their costs down. I'm wondering, have we looked at what if we did go totally private? Would we have, like, what type of savings would we have of programs we don't need for state funding and that type of thing?
I made reference to 3 committees that are looking at budgets across the campus, program portfolios, et cetera. I'm going to talk in more detail about their work later in the presentation. But what I've encouraged the direction that we take as an institution, the direction that we take is to focus on our internal policies, on our internal bureaucracy, on our internal blue tape. We may not be able to reduce the level of reporting that's required to Washington. In fact, that's just going to increase. You know, one of the great givens in higher education is that support does this, but bureaucracy does this. Rather than lamenting the things that we cannot control, what I think we should do is look internally at our processes, look internally at our policies, in many respects, just say, if the rules don't work, let's throw the rules out and start over again with respect to internal procedures. So we've not spent a great deal of time looking at what we'd like the state to do differently, but we are spending a fair amount of time looking at what we can do differently internally. Dr. Schott.
In follow-up to what you just said about support goes down and bureaucracy goes up, two kind of related questions. First, if you were to do this same graph over time, on the question of how much financial friction is there on budgets from the cost of centralized administration, like THEC and TBR, what would we be looking at? And then, maybe you got that. And then a related question is, in addition to the state reducing support, have they also increased our costs with unfunded mandates?
The information related to system administration costs is contained within the data slides, and I'd be happy to provide you with similar data slides years back.
With regard to Tennessee Promise, if state funding is a function of outcomes rather than enrollment, can you comment on how a reduction of freshman enrollments 8, 9, or 10% would impact funding?
Well, if you, sorry for jumping around, if we were to experience a decline of 100 first-time freshmen, and just for the simplicity of math perspective, we'll go with 100 freshmen, those 100 freshmen will have a much more significant impact on the tuition side of the equation than they would on the state appropriation side of the equation. But the impact from the state side will be felt downstream, because we'll have fewer students crossing the 24 credit hour threshold, the 48 credit hour threshold, the 72 credit hour threshold. And then when the state is examining the number of degrees produced this year against the number of degrees produced last year, sooner or later those enrollment declines are going to come back unless you, on the backside, grow your transfer enrollment. That's one of the great hopes both of Tennessee Promise as well as the proposition that was put forward by President Obama last week, is that more students will attend post-secondary education because of the promise, which in time will yield greater transfer numbers. There was a great article today in the Washington Post citing 2 economists from William & Mary who make reference to graduation rates among native community college students and native university students. And I have slides in here on graduation rates in a little bit, but the cliff notes of the report is that 2 students with equal academic preparation, one starts at community college, one starts at a university. The one that initiates their enrollment at a university has almost double the probability of receiving a bachelor's degree than the student who began at a community college. So there's a lot of dynamic moving parts here, and sometimes public policy isn't as simple as it appears on the surface. But I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Dr. Alsop. Along the same criteria that the outcomes are measured for the university.
Could you repeat the question?
The question was, how are outcomes measured at a community college? And I said, along the same criteria that they are for a university. Now, the bachelor's, master's, doctoral research grants, et cetera, would not be there. I'm showing the outcomes for a university. But the student credit progressions, the degrees produced, the certificates that produced, there's also a workforce placement criteria in the community college formula, but they are measured on outcomes just as we are. And it's progressions through the pipeline, and then it's the transmission of certificates or degrees.
Well, when you started this discussion period, you presented an argument that we should move towards private university model. And your argument, I think, was based on the observation that the state contributions to per student costs have been reduced over the past 15 years from about 60% to about 40%. Now you're arguing that we should go to a private university model because you're predicting these state contributions will be reduced another 30% from 40 down to 10. Did I get that right?
Look, let me clarify, because the theme is consistent. As we examine the means through which we as a university generate revenue to support the operations of the institution, the means through which those revenues are transferred to the university has fundamentally changed, shifting from an institution that was primarily supported by the state to now an institution that is primarily supported by students. And if we were to watch the trend lines move forward, that trend line will continue to decline in terms of the percent of overall operating support that is derived by state resources. So when I make the comment of we should transition towards a private model, that's examining all aspects of private higher education and researching what are the elements of activity that they engage in to generate revenue. How are programs aligned? What do they look like in terms of their philanthropic activity? How do they generate revenues from fundraising and external support? How do they market? How do they recruit? But what are the activities that private institutions are engaged in to sustain their lifeblood, given the fact that they're totally dependent upon non-state revenues to support the operations of the institution? So I didn't mean to suggest we're going to cut ties with the state. I'm suggesting that in order for us to continue to thrive and to be successful, we have to look in a much more entrepreneurial manner towards the solution to the challenges that present ourselves, rather than waiting, as many state institutions do, to see what's going to come from Nashville to save us. Did I answer your question?
Well, I see you arguing that we should get out ahead of a trend where state support is being reduced.
Exactly right.
By anticipating an intrinsically different financial model.
Correct.
I'm not sure if that serves our mission as a state university, as a regional university, to provide a diverse set of educational programs to our students. And if you look at what private universities do and what state universities do, they're not necessarily the same thing. And I think that having sustained a decrease over 15 years from 60 to 40% doesn't necessarily mean that we need to continue and plan on a decrease by another 20%, much less 30%. So I think we should look critically at this question of whether we want to act more like a private university and consider maybe we should want to act more like a public university.
And I agree that we need to look critically at this. And my hope is that as we begin the strategic planning process for 2015-20, that these are the questions that we wrestle with. I firmly believe that our mission is rooted in a stewardship of place. And in a little later, when I get to some slides, I'm going to put some things up that clearly say our mission is stewardship of place. Our mission is to serve the people of Appalachia. Where I think we may have a little disagreement is how we generate the resources to pay for that mission.
I'm going to introduce the taboo subject of politics here. We're talking about a climate that has exponentially increased over the last 6 years, but has really begun in the period that you described, in which an ideology has taken hold that demonizes the public good, that tries to exile the very concept of public good. And I'm wondering about whether it's I certainly appreciate the prudence of trying to plan for an increased erosion of the public good in order to survive as an institution. But I wonder if our responsibility, if we believe in stewardship of the public good, is perhaps to resist that and become more articulate spokespeople for a more humane approach to the social compact. That's my question.
Understood. I do not disagree with the philosophical basis of your question. I firmly believe in the public purposes of higher education. We're here to serve the people of East Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, Western North Carolina, and Eastern Kentucky. We've had a long-standing debate on campus, a debate that goes back to the 20s about the academic preparation of our students. I think the quality of a university isn't measured in the quality of a student that you accept, but in the quality of the graduate who walks across your stage. I believe access, it's part of my mission, part of who I am. It's one of the things that's so great about this university. But where I'm wrestling, and I don't have an answer to your question because I'm wrestling with this as well, is how do we continue to be an institution focused on serving the people of Appalachia, but then generate the resources to cover the operations of the institution and to provide fair compensation to our faculty and to our staff, where I think we're going to wrestle as a campus, and we've been wrestling with this. I mean, we've wrestled with this as we move through a 6.2% reduction in our base budget, is how do we continue to do all of the things that we're doing, but do them with quality? And that's my struggle. I think that's our struggle as a campus, as we look at the number of variables that are at play here, but with the primary mission to be good stewards of the public trust and to be stewards of place, how do we continue to move all of the things that we're moving, but do them with quality? Because I wish that we had $16,930 per student. Think of what we could do with $45 million. So if the state is not going to provide the resources, then what are the things that we can control that either move this number or bring other resources into play? What can we do in terms of fundraising? What can we do in terms of external grants and contracts? But if that state number, even if it just stays constant, our ability to do things with quality is predicated on revenue diversification and revenue generation. We have to move that number up.
Do you think then, as we sort of move that increasingly into that model, is it most likely the planning for this and the implementation of these ideas to be manifest on a departmental level, on a college level? Do you know what I mean? Or is it sort of all of the above?
If I could hold and get to that in a little bit, because that's another element that as a campus we need to really have a conversation around. And I want to stress that's my hope with today, is to begin a conversation. It's not my intent to stand before you to present data and to say, here's the way it is and the way it's going to be. My hope is to present some data, to put my biases in front of the faculty, and to begin a conversation on how do we collectively as a university, because the university belongs to the faculty are the soul of the university, how do we collectively form a vision that moves us forward? So in a little bit, I'll talk around some ideas of decentralization and empowering colleges and departments. If you could just give me a little bit to get there.
The data that shows source of revenue, tuition and fees versus state, that also include other sources such as private giving, endowments.
This does not include auxiliary revenues, many of which could be restricted. This is E&G unrestricted operating dollars. So let me jump into tuition and fees, because this will, I think, help to continue to inform the conversation. As we examine where we as a state stand with respect to tuition and fees, the charts that I'm going to show give a perspective of our tuition and fees in comparison to those states that comprise the SRAB, both for in-state tuition as well as out-of-state tuition. So you have a snapshot for 10-12 and a snapshot for 13-14. You can see the extent to which tuition and fees in Tennessee have increased and how we compare to other states across the South. So you see South Carolina's numbers, you see Delaware's numbers, you see the numbers for Alabama. North Carolina, the state here at 6,514, is a state that has historically believed in the public mission of their institutions, and they've had very strong support from the tax base to support their operations. The numbers in North Carolina, however, are trending downward, and I think the steep of that curve will be greater than those in other states across the South here in the coming years. Here's out-of-state tuition and fees. You see out-of-state tuition and fees for Tennessee, $24,000. I'll draw attention to my former state, the state of West Virginia, where it's $17,000. West Virginia has positioned out-of-state tuition and fees so that they are at a market advantage. At that institution, 50% of their freshman class are out-of-state students. So they have examined the reduction in state support and look to diversify their enrollment base to help offset the decreases in state support. So I'm showing out-of-state tuition here for a reason as well, that $24,301 is a pretty steep price point if you could attend UNC Asheville for $6,500. We are unique to other institutions in the state in that we can get to Asheville quicker than we can to Morristown. We can get to Greenville-Spartanburg faster than we can to Crossville, and we can go to Atlanta quicker than we can get to Nashville. Our ability to grow from an enrollment perspective, I think, is directly linked to our ability to grow in out-of-state markets. So part of the reason why we launched the Carter Scholarships and the Gilbert Scholarships this fall was to provide opportunities for strong academic students, students with 3.0s and 22s, to have the opportunity to come to ETSU and for price not to be a factor. My mom works at A.C. Reynolds High School in Asheville, North Carolina. And when I have talked to students in her high school, they say, well, Dr. Nolan, I can't afford to go to ETSU. It's $20-some thousand. I'd love to come to ETSU. It's an hour away. It's a great school. I love the mountain setting. But price is a prohibitive factor. So part of the reason why we implemented the Carter Scholarship is that that student, if they take advantage of the Carter Scholarship, can come to East Tennessee State University and pay right at about $8,000 in tuition and fees. That's a student we would not have had if it were not for the scholarships that were available. And these are high-achieving academic students, which will increase the level of academic competition in your classrooms every day. I'm going to talk more about Carter in a little bit, but I wanted to pause just to give a little background for why the decision was made and where the scholarship target was set. It's also set at a level that allows us to beat the South Carolina institutions on price by about $2,500. So it's $2,500 less expensive for a student to come here than to USC Upstate. And I think we're going to be a pretty attractive institution to students in Columbia, Greenville, and Spartanburg. And I'm going to find the proof in the pudding of this next week. Next week I'm spending 2 days going high school by high school by high school in Asheville. The week after that, high school by high school by high school in Greenville, and the week after that, the same thing in Spartanburg. So I'll have a better sense of how this is received when we're out meeting with students, parents, and high school counselors. Here's the in-state tuition and fee comparisons. You see our tuition and fee comparisons to that of Knoxville. Knoxville is about a full $3,000 above the price of tuition and fees at almost any Tennessee Board of Regents university. But I want to step back because I don't want anyone to think that I'm talking about fees in a callous manner. All of us, as we look at our students when they walk into class next Tuesday, I think would be well educated to remember some of the numbers I'm going to put in front of you. The majority of our students are either the first in their family to attend college or they're attending this institution through assistance in the lottery scholarship or Pell Grants. As part of the Standard & Poor's material today, they reference the challenges of balancing access with affordability. And I think there's an upward limit on tuition and fees. We just can't simply say overnight we're going to take fees to $20,000 and solve all of our problems. We must be mindful of the population that we serve. And it's a population for the state as a whole where 41% of our students are Pell eligible. The freshman class at ETSU, the traditional class, not the non-traditional students, but our traditional students, 75% of our undergraduate population aged 24 and under is Pell eligible. 75%. And then how does that compare to peers? Now, mind you, this number is 49. That's overall. If you see here, our 25 and up, that number is very different. So if someone's saying, why am I saying 75% here and 49% here? Because that is the entirety of the freshman class, irrespective of age. But the point being, as we look at price, we have to balance price with affordability and recognize why we're here, and that's to educate the people of the region. But this data, I think, is helpful as we start looking at a number of the elements as we prepare for our strategic planning process of who are the students we serve, what are we trying to accomplish in helping them as they move through their degree aspirations, and then potentially what do other institutions, let's say, for example, Wright State, whose distribution from a demographic perspective isn't altogether that different than ours, what are they doing that's unique to our activities because their graduation rates are significantly higher than ours? Another element is debt. Now, mind you, this is the debt of graduates. The average graduate from ETSU has $27,000 in debt at the point at which they walk across the stage and receive their degree. But about 85% of our undergraduate students borrow. So if you're a student who comes to ETSU from Sneedville, you're here for 2 years, you borrow $5,000 per year, things don't go well and you return home to Sneedville, you have $10,000 in debt. And what have we done for or to that student? I've shared this story on a number of occasions, so if you've heard it before, I apologize. But I'm fortunate to have the opportunity to travel around the region and travel around the South and talk to students and parents in urban communities and rural communities. And I had a life-changing conversation with a parent in a small town in West Virginia about 5 years ago. This individual was a non-traditional student. They'd gone back to school to major in nursing, and the institution that they had elected to attend did not uphold its commitment. The institution ultimately lost its accreditation. And as I'm at a community forum talking to individuals who were part of this nursing cohort, this lady looked at me powerfully and said, you know, I don't care who you are, college has ruined my life. I'm X amount of dollars in debt. I have nothing to show for it. I can't get the debt collectors off my back. I would have been better off never going to college. College ruined my life. And I tell that story to remind us all that the majority of our students are Pell eligible. Almost every single one of your students is borrowing to have the honor to sit in your class and engage in a learning experience. And I think it's just sobering as we start a spring semester to just be mindful of the fact that these students are overcoming the odds to be here. And as we look at revenue structures, as we talk about privatization, I mean, this is one of the things that I'm really struggling with, is how do we continue to evolve as a university, but not lose why we're here? And that's to educate first-generation students, low-income students. And you're going to see in a couple of minutes that those are the populations that are growing. It's the high-achieving traditional populations that are going to be harder and harder to attract not only to our university, but to any university. So I'm going to move through a couple more slides, and then I want to pause again for questions and conversation. These are some of the elements that have become part of Complete College that are impacting the landscape. There's increased competition for enrollment across all sectors of higher education in the state. I see that every fall when Middle Tennessee State University brings their big blue bus and for all intents and purposes parks it on our campus. The Millennium Center isn't our campus, but might as well be. That's competition. When another Board of Regents institution drives a bus with all their deans and president parks on your campus and recruits students from your backyard, that's competition. And the competition, I think, will become more pronounced among the universities with Promise. There's a lot of conversation that is occurring in the state because of Western Governors. Western Governors is now a chartered public university. They're eligible for state financial aid. It's an institution that focuses primarily on prior learning assessments, adult degree completion, but there are a lot of elements that the state has imposed that are making the policy landscape very fluid and very dynamic. Just some quick glimpses of enrollment. This is a total picture of enrollment across all of higher education in the state of Tennessee for fall 2013. About 394,000 students total enrolled. Here's enrollment within the public sector, and you see the downward trend in 11, 12, and 13. This is enrollment as a whole across every institution, and I draw your attention to a couple of data points. Our data point, we've spent a lot of time on campus examining what's happening with our enrollment, but look at some of our sister institutions in the Board of Regents system who have experienced a 2,600 student decline in their enrollment base. So as we examine where we are, I guarantee you that other institutions across the state are asking similar questions on how do we increase enrollment, how do we diversify revenues, but we're fortunate in that our decline is not as significant as the decline at other institutions. Here's enrollment for the fall. So this is census data enrollment. THEC has not released final fall enrollment, but this is the most recent data I have on where we are. So once again, the institution here at 6,600 students, and there they are for the fall at 2,200 students. So that's 4,000 students times $8,000. That's a $32 million budget cut. That shows the implications of the shift from public to private. We can talk all we want about the funding formula, but if our enrollment doesn't make the base, that will have a much more significant impact on bottom line dollars than the state. Knoxville's numbers, Chattanooga, et cetera. Quick glimpse on where students come from. 82% of our enrollment base is from these counties. 990 students from Virginia and North Carolina, 473 students from international students. If we are able to grow, we have to not only protect the base, but I think look to grow these two numbers, because competition for students here will just increase dramatically as a result of Promise. Some folks have asked, why is enrollment dropping? Someone said, enrollment was great until you got here. It's all your fault. It could be. There are a lot of mistakes that I've made, but I also think that we have entered a landscape that was very different than the landscape 3-4 years ago. We've talked about Promise, et cetera, but what the chart behind me shows is just simple numbers. There are right at 6,000 fewer students who graduated from high school in May of 14 than there were in May of 2010. That's about 3,700 fewer first-time freshmen enrolling across the state of Tennessee. So much of the cause of the enrollment decline here and at Middle and at other universities across the state is just simply a function of demographic shifts. What I want to do is talk a little bit about the upturn. This data comes from WICHE, the Western Interstate Compact on Higher Education. Here I have to 2021. I acquired some new data from them that marches this out a little farther. So here's the enrollment growth through 2027. This is all graduates across the state of Tennessee. There'll be a 14% increase in high school graduates from the baseline of 13 to the baseline of 2027. But within traditional populations, the number is 2%. Within minority, low-income populations, the growth is 42%. So as we look 2, 3, 4, 5 years out at enrollment patterns, at recruitment patterns, at student services, and at price, we must be very mindful that the students who are moving through the pipeline look very different than the students who have moved through the pipeline historically. Some quick data on applications. We do a great job with yield because we have a pretty small number of students who apply to the institution. I think one of the goals is to increase the number of students applying to East Tennessee State University, and that's some things we can talk about. A question that people have posed to me repeatedly, and I put the data because the data tells the story. We could improve our graduation rates if we just simply increased our admission standards. Our overall ACT score is identical to that of Middle. It's above that of Austin P. It's not too far off that of other institutions in the university system. So for me, this is not a function of if we just increase our admission standards, we'll solve all the world's problems. Because these other institutions are doing something differently, and our Access to Success committees are exploring this in detail, that they're experiencing different outcome results as evident by measured by TIC than we are. A little bit on transfer. We send 249 students each fall from our institution to community colleges to complete their education. So these are students who came to East Tennessee State University for whatever reason. This was not the home that they wanted, and they transferred in reverse. So 126 went to Northeast State, 22 went to Roane State, 25 went to Walter State. But I think it's, for me, informative just to look at the number of students each year who transfer from here to community colleges. It's also interesting to look at the number of students who transfer from here to other institutions. We send 48 students each year to Knoxville, but each year Knoxville sends 42 students to us. So if you follow these charts across when you get home, great thing to do before you go to bed, it'll really put you to sleep. But to get a sense of the transfer patterns across the state. What it shows is that students are increasingly mobile, and that the thought of a student coming here and staying here all 4, 5, or 6 years is not the emerging norm in higher education. The emerging norm is that of multiple enrollments at multiple institutions. Our retention rates, our retention rate is 75% freshman to sophomore year. Our graduation rate, this is the one that I like to use, is 51.8%. The reason I like to use this is because this is the graduation rate of a first-time full-time degree-seeking student, which is how IPEDS defines the cohort, who graduates anywhere. So this is start at ETSU, graduate at Knoxville. Start at ETSU, graduate at Virginia Tech. Our standalone number, start at ETSU, graduate at ETSU, is 41 to 42%, depending upon the year. So we see a 10% spike in our graduation rate by using this larger encapsulation area of the THEC data set. Here's our peer comparisons. Here's the graduation rate that I mentioned, and then you can see how we compare to other institutions. So Greensboro, 54%, even though their demographics aren't altogether that dissimilar from ours. Marshall, 44%. And you can see here within the ACT portfolios, pretty informative information on how our entering group of freshmen compares to theirs. So now Promise. We've talked about Promise. Everyone knows what Promise is. But where Promise will immediately have an impact on us is not only in the loss of students, but in the purchasing power of the Hope Scholarship for those students who do come to ETSU. Because for freshmen and sophomores, the Hope Scholarship has been reduced from $4,000 to $3,500, which means those students have to look elsewhere for revenue to offset what had heretofore been provided by the lottery scholarship. And you can see the number of students at East Tennessee State University who have lottery scholarships. I'm going to pause before going into details on the budget and our new budget processes. So questions on financial aid, on tuition, on Promise, because this is the chance to kind of dive into that before I transition to a different theme. All right, then let me move on. Update on where we are with respect to budget and where we could go with respect to budget and strategic planning. This has been a difficult year. This has been an extremely difficult year because in a single year time period, we have carved 6.2% out of our base budget. But we've done so without shedding faculty. We've done so without sourcing staff. We've done so in a way that was thoughtful, that was deliberative, and that positioned us so that as we grow, we've moved through an element in which we stayed true to our values, which are people come first. Last year, there was a rampant rumor across campus that we were going to outsource custodial services. If we had outsourced custodial services, that would have presented about $600,000 to $700,000 in savings that we could have redirected towards other aspects of the institution. We could have redirected that $600,000 to $700,000 in savings towards salaries. And this was a decision that I made, that the leadership team made, and if you all disagree with it, then please point the criticism. But I could not go to bed at night knowing that we outsourced custodial services to give the rest of the campus a 1% raise. If we're a campus that says people come first, then we've got to put our people first and subsequently make some difficult decisions to tighten belts. And that's what we as a campus did, and for that I say thank you. Everyone in this room has experienced some form of budget reduction, be it travel, be it the ability to do some things in terms of professional development, be it support for research. We've tightened our belts across the board, but in doing so, we were able to secure all of the individuals who look to ETSU for employment. I'm hopeful as we move forward with the budget process, we're building from that base and we're building up. I'm hopeful that as we move forward, we're in a position that we're not having to go back again and make significant reductions to the base budget. But I can't stand before you and say it's going to be that way, because I don't know what will come in terms of the next great public policy opportunity from other settings on high. But as long as the landscape remains constant, I'm very, very confident in our current year budget, and I'm very, very confident in where we're going moving forward, because what I'd like to do is to decentralize budgeting. One of the things that runs through each of these committees, I'm going to talk about the committees in a second, is a point that I've heard as I've visited with departments, as I've visited with faculty. Everyone has said, Dr. Nolan, we don't understand how the budgets at East Tennessee State University are developed. There appears to be this black box, and from the black box emerges a budget. Our budget process is not different from any other institution in the state or any other institution in the country that relies upon a base plus budgeting system, because that's what we have, a base plus. The base is what it is. We don't go back and redistribute the base. We do not prioritize the base. What you had last year is what carries forward into the next budget cycle, and then we'll add elements to it, hence the plus. The question that we're asking with these three committees is, how does our budget align to our strategic plan? At the current moment, our budget does not align with our strategic plan. But as we embark upon a new strategic planning process, we have the opportunity, you have the opportunity as faculty, to align the budget with the strategic plan and to create a budget that operates in concert. For the past year to year and a half, we've had three committees examining our budget processes, opportunities for administrative efficiencies, as well as our portfolio of academic degree programs. I've made a commitment to try to be open, transparent, and inclusive. Sometimes I feel that I'm very open and very transparent, but I don't know if I'm communicating effectively. It's a lot like talking with my young son. I'll tell Jackson something, and 5 minutes later I'll ask him, what did I say? He didn't hear me. He'll say, well, Daddy, I told you this, you didn't hear me either. And our messages get lost in differences of language. And I hope that today begins a conversation in which we can begin to agree upon some language and collectively as an institution form a vision. These three committees have been working hard to provide that foundation, and all of the work of the committees is available through that link. So if you go home tonight and click on that link, that pulls up a website where you can track the minutes of these three committees. You can look at the issues that they've deliberated, their PowerPoints, all of the background activities, and then right on the front page there's a big suggestion box that you can click on that suggestion box and provide feedback. This process, this budget, however we move forward, is only going to be as strong as your input. We're not going to be able to move to a decentralized budget without the input of everybody in this room, the folks who are watching live, and the folks who are preparing for the return to the classroom next week. These are some of the things that those three committees have been discussing. How do we recognize the changing social compact? How do we create revenue sources and invest in peer equity? How do we create resources to support research and professional development? How do we streamline processes? How do we make it easier for people to do their jobs? I can't tell you how many faculty have said, Dr. Nolan, it's a pain in the backside to do research here because I've got to fill out this form, this form, this form. I've got to walk forms all across campus. And by the time I'm done, I've lost my desire to research. We've got to find a way to get bureaucracy out of the way so that you all are empowered to do the things that you love to do, which is to teach, to research, and to serve. How do we diversify our enrollments? Do we transition to a decentralized budgeting process? How do we jumpstart philanthropy? And you can see the other items that are on the list. These are the thematic elements that these three committees have been researching for over a year. And these are some questions that I want to pause on, and I'm going to come back to in a second. But I want to go to here. So there was a question earlier around public purposes of the institution. I've spent some time over the break kind of examining where we could be as a university. If I were a czar and I could outline, here's the data points, here's where we're going to be, and here's what we're going to hold everyone accountable for, based on my analysis of the data, my forecast projections, running regression models, here's what I think we could look like. Not tomorrow, not in 2020, but before 2025. These are, I think, realistic, aspirational data points for the university. 18,000 students enrolled either here, online, or off campus. We're opening a new off-campus site in Strawberry Plains, east of Knoxville. So through our off-campus locations, our online activity, and traditional enrollment on campus, 18,000 students puts us at a revenue level that could support a lot of the things we want to occur on campus. 3,000 additional students is in excess of $25 million in new revenue to support the institution. So without tuition increases, the generation of revenue from enrollment can help fuel the university. I'd like to see a larger number of out-of-state and international students to not only diversify our enrollment portfolio, but to bring diversity into the conversations in the residence halls and in the classrooms. Our transfer enrollment to increase, a 60% graduation rate, and that's not the THEC number, that's start at ETSU, finish at ETSU. An 85% retention rate, 12,000 applications. We're right at, numbers for last year are right at around 5. With a 23 ACT score, which is moving from a 21.8 to a 23. $100 million in externally sponsored research. We do about $40-some million now. It's been as high as 50, but let's just call it mid-40s. $25 million in annual giving, which is double what it is now. A 15% alumni participation rate. This past year was 3.1%. The year before that, it was 2.7. A lot of people have asked me questions about, well, why are you so focused on community relations? Dr. Nolan, you're foolish for starting football. You're foolish for all these things to build connections with the community. We have to move this number because as our alumni participation rates increase and we welcome alumni back to campus, then that jumpstarts philanthropy and it brings resources to the campus in terms of private support that are not here now. 3,500 students living on campus, another 2,500 in the surrounding 2-mile radius. Yes, that means we've got to build a new residence hall, and we increase graduate stipends $1,000 annually for each year of the planning cycle. Those are my benchmarks. What I hope we can do as we move through the planning process is to have a conversation as a campus on, are these realistic? What am I missing? But what do you as faculty, what do we as an ETSU family set as our goals and objectives? If we look at an institution to the west, they have a simple goal, to be a top 25 university. You can write that on the back of a business card. What I'd like to see us move to is a sense of consensus around who we see ourselves as and what we would like to become. Maybe that's a top 100 institution. Maybe that's double the number of nationally ranked programs. But to provide some clear and identifiable benchmarks so that we all know the things that we're striving towards. but to have those benchmarks developed under what I see as the vision in which we're an institution dedicated to a stewardship of place, we're committed to student success and enhancing the quality of life for the people of Appalachia. So the needs of the people, just as they've been, the needs of the region, just as they've been since we were founded in 1911, I don't see us wavering from those. But ladies and gentlemen, these are my ideas. What I hope we can do as a campus is to begin looking at these questions. I'm going to put the questions up. I'm not going to walk through all of them, but I'd like to pause to see what questions you have. I don't have the answers for these. I think these are questions that we collectively need to work through. How do we define, measure, and celebrate academic quality? We do a poor job of celebrating on this campus. People of Appalachia by nature are humble. We need to do a better job of celebrating our success. We need to do a better job of celebrating faculty publications or large research grants. We need to do a better job of celebrating the outreach in the community. But how do we celebrate our successes? How do we compete with promise? How do we enhance graduate education? How do we navigate the emergence of new health science institutions around us? And then at the end, how do we improve communications? So these are some questions that I welcome your responses to over the course of the semester, but I want to pause and see what questions you have of me, or once again, as I referenced before, if I'm out in left field, let's have a conversation about it, because I want to get a sense of your perspective as we begin to move forward. Dr. Dula.
I want to make a comment and then have a question. My comment is thank you for doing this, because I think this communication issue is the main problem we need to address first, because I think everybody in here has a deep commitment to this university, including you, and that we have a disconnect that needs to be healed or fixed, and by so doing we will improve everybody's view. I've come to you a couple times because you have an open door policy, and I am an extremely assertive person, and there's probably another A word that somebody else might use to describe it. So I just come when I have comments and thoughts, and my main issue here is that we had morale seems to have been at its lowest point since I've been here in 10 years. And I see, and through my conversations with you, that you are very committed, very knowledgeable, very much trying to engage with faculty in ways that have not trickled down to where the general person on the street has knowledge of what's going on, and things look top down. So transition into the current situation, when you sent out a PowerPoint slide of 64 slides, I said, oh my God, right? That's going to be a terribly long lecture. And I know people who decided not to come because they thought that's what this would be. And I'm very glad to see it's a conversation, and it's beginning a process of conversation that I want to see continue. I saw other people who said, well, now I've got this, so I don't need to go hear it. And other people who said, I've heard it. But I think a lot of people argue from premises where they don't have data and they don't have knowledge. And I see that as very transparent to give people the data and the knowledge so they can make informed decisions about whether they agree or disagree with certain things. What I would ask, though, my question is, could you change the name of this thing? Can you do it more often and change it to Town Hall? I don't know what plenary means. And I think other people didn't see it as an open conversation. They saw it as maybe a lecture or a top-down convincing of how we're going to go. So that if we do it in the future, I think you'll get more people here. And I think it's on all of us to go back and talk to everybody in all of our departments about how this is a conversation. And rather than just complain and gripe about what we don't know, that we take the responsibility to get informed with the data we do have and to participate in the conversation actively such that we are all gratified by the outcome.
Thank you. I am very open to town hall meetings, open forums, whatever we want to call them. We've been doing that with the staff all fall. So there's probably been 4 or 5 open forums for staff. We've held them on the main campus. We've held them on the Quillen campus. But this one, the bottom one, to me, it caused me to pull my hair out. Part of the times I think communication is code word for apprehension with change. There's a lot of change happening around us. You know, a year ago, if we would have thought students could attend Northeast State for free, I said, Dr. Dula, you're crazy. But that change has created a great deal of uncertainty on campus. We all saw our budgets reduced because of enrollment declines, and everybody's nervous that enrollment declines are going to continue. I believe in doing my homework. So I've gone back and done homework on how we as a university responded to the GI Bill, how we as a university responded to the Great Depression, how we as a university responded to more recently the advent of the Hope Scholarship. When Hope was created, there was great concern on this campus that a lot of our high-end students were all going to go to Knoxville and enrollment would decline. Well, after the dust settled a little bit, we increased our enrollment through the creation of honors colleges and other things, and enrollment as a whole grew. So I'm worried about Promise. I'm concerned that 90% of the seniors across the state of Tennessee applied, but Promise isn't as simple as applying. There's mentoring and other things that students have to be engaged with in order to qualify for the scholarship. But, because I'll be honest, our job is to convey to students the benefits of an investment in a university education. There's a difference between a university education and the level of education that a student would receive at other places. I'm not being critical of our sister institutions, but it's our job to convince students and parents of the benefit of coming here. Undergraduate research, small classes, and engaged faculty. I'm visiting high school to high school. I visited 25 high schools in the fall. Students love this institution. This is a well-respected institution, and from a quality perspective, people in Morristown and Knoxville and Sevierville rank us above almost any other public university in the state, -1. So we're a well-regarded quality undergraduate university. It's incumbent upon all of us to help convince students that it's within their best interest that they want a baccalaureate degree to begin that experience at a university.
Dr. Nolan, the Tennessee Promise is a last dollar scholarship.
Correct.
Has anybody done any numbers where they take a typical graduating senior from high school and they go through and say, okay, it's a last dollar scholarship. What is the actual cost from the Tennessee Promise for that student to attend community college? And then what would it be if they were to choose to do the same thing, you know, file for the same scholarships, and what would the cost be if they decided to come here?
We've not put that in a formal manner on the website, but I've had that conversation with students. I was in a high school in a county to our south with a school administrator who was talking about Promise and how Promise was going to change the college choice decision for their child. So we began to talk for a little bit. This person's spouse had lost their job. Given the number of children that they had, they were Pell eligible, and their child had a 27. So as we walked through everything, a 27 at ETSU, full Pell eligible, $5,000 for Pell, $3,500 for the lottery. We're then going to put a $3,000 academic performance scholarship on top of that. You're now well up over $11,500 in support. $11,500 plus a Rotary scholarship or a Kiwanis scholarship. Let's just take that to 12. 12 against 3. Because last dollar, the hope is your Promise. It's not an additive scholarship, it's last dollar in. And I think all of us need to really look at how that works, because you all are in the community. And if someone says, hey, I've got a 26 on the ACT score, what would financial aid at ETSU look like? The ability to just walk through quickly, well, this plus this plus this puts you here. But we've not done it as discreetly and concretely as you just requested.
We've had this discussion in our department, and it seems to me that if we're trying to sell ourselves and compete with the Promise, then that might be the way to do it, because there is value added in coming to ETSU from the get-go. I don't know what that value added is, but as you just said,
twice the likelihood of graduation.
Yeah, but like you just said, that there's a lot to be said for starting with ETSU and getting through. Your graduation rate goes up, as you've shown on our previous slide. So it seems to me that might be one way to approach this, and that is, say we have 3 different scenarios. Let's say you come from this type of family, you're eligible for this scholarship, this one, like you just went through,
and you basically compare. This is what it's going to cost you if you go to, you know, community college XYZ, versus if you came to ETSU. It's going to cost you a little bit more, for sure, but the added value of starting here and your increased chance of graduation.
And we have we have a well-rounded scholarship portfolio. So with the ETSU Promise, the academic performance scholarships, the Roan, honors, et cetera, we have a rich distribution of institutional aid that's packaged with lottery scholarships. And I think if you were to compare net price here against net price at other larger public universities in the state, we're probably $3,000, $4,000 less expensive than they are just from a net price perspective. Dr. Bitter, I thought I saw your hand.
Dr. Nolan, I like optimism as much as the next guy. At 67, I'm hopeful. But when I look at the numbers on the slide you had before this one, I'm unclear what differentiates that from a pie in the sky. Like what gets us? What is the plan that gets us to all those things you thought could happen? I look at, like for instance, if I remember correctly, last year we improved in everything in relation to the Complete College Tennessee Act and still lost money because we didn't do it as well as some other institution. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the Tennessee Promise thing is going to come in, and you're projecting we're going to lose X number of students. And no matter what happens at community colleges, the transfer rate has stayed relatively constant, if I remember correctly, at around 1/3 for the last 20 years. And the community college faculty is increasingly part-time, with some community colleges having adjuncts at almost 70%. And the quality of the transferring student, therefore, coming in with often coursework that would not be equivalent to what they would have taken had they been here, which might account for why they don't wind up completing degrees as quickly as if they started here. So what I see when I'm looking at the paper and when I'm listening to what happens around, it feels like a lot of discouragement to me. And I look at that, and that just seems to be so far beyond anything that we're doing. I don't see what the steps are that encourage me in any way to say, okay, yes, we would have a great institution if we could do all of that, but how the hell do you get there?
And I understand your point. My response would be how in the world do we get there is a question that will be answered as we move through the development of a strategic planning process and we implement a lot of things that are in the way, that are currently underway. 2 weeks ago, we initiated our partnership with an entity called Royale Incorporated. Royal is a company that does direct mail marketing to high school seniors, to juniors and sophomores all across the country. We explored this last year, but someone said no one reads their mail. Why in the world are we going to work with a company that does direct mail solicitations to high school students? So last year we didn't do it. Then fast forward to a high school visit. I was at Gatlinburg-Pittman High School in the early fall, and I was asking a focus group of students, where do you get information about colleges? They go, the mail. All of a sudden, the mail. We love the mail, and if there's a sticker in there, boy, we really love that institution. So as I started going from high school to high school, I asked the question, where do you get information about colleges? Websites, et cetera. No, we love the mail. So it's come full cycle. I hate the mail. High school students love the mail. So now to jump to answer your question, we've partnered with Royale. Royale is an entity that will direct mail market students who have academic interests that align with our mission portfolio. So the students who are in the Carter Scholarship Ring, 250 miles, 150 miles in, we're going to mass mail. 150 miles out, we're going to mail for students who've expressed an interest in the health sciences. So to put the name of our institution into markets where we've been invisible, that moves the needle on applications. I had the chance to go up and I'm going to apologize for wandering. I do my best to stay focused, but I'm going to wander a little bit here. Right before the break, I had a chance to go with Dr. Sander to VCU and spend some time with his former president, Dr. Gene Trani. VCU is an institution that over a 10-year period worked closely with Royale to market that institution. VCU is a school that went from less than 20,000 students to well up over 35,000 students now. They didn't do it overnight. It was a 10 to 15-year plan. They put marketing in the mix. They put enrollment management in the mix. The president visited high schools, held deans and others accountable for also getting out and recruiting. This is a culture change. And Dr. Bitter, that's what makes it so difficult, and that's why all the conversation around communication. This is a culture change. This is a daily focus on student success. This is a focus that all of us are in the business of recruitment, not just me, all of us. To hit these numbers requires a culture change. But what's the end result? I don't mean to make everything as simple as salaries, but if we can grow our enrollment by 3,000 students, then that gives us resources to invest in research, resources to invest in our people. Without a culture change, I agree with you, it's a pretty dismal picture. But I hope that we as a campus will be aggressive as we always have been. State said you couldn't have a med school, forget you, we're going to have a med school. Can't have a pharmacy school, forget you, we're going to have a pharmacy school. We've been a campus that's turned its nose and done things in an independent manner. And I think if we come together and do things in an independent manner, we'll blow a lot of these stats through the roof. But I'm a pretty optimistic guy.
You mentioned the mass mailing. Are there other things that we've already started to do that we might not know to address these?
Yes, so to outreach with students and parents. We're holding targeted dinners at Shellbridge for students with select ACT scores, inviting they and their parents to campus to meet with the deans, to meet with the VPs, to talk about the opportunities that are available at the university. We're visiting high schools. We're engaging our alumni with prospective high school seniors to talk about the opportunities available at the university. We've enhanced scholarships through the ETSU Promise, the Carter, and the Gilbreth. We will begin to put billboards in strategic areas like Asheville, Greenville, and Spartanburg. All of these things will build over time. I think the next step in this, which is kind of my transition, well, it's a transition to budgets. If we decentralize our budget, as will be potentially called for by one of the three committees, and we provide the opportunity for colleges and departments to carry resources forward, for colleges and departments to be rewarded for entrepreneurial activity, then I think that will also spur growth and innovation, because departments have a sense of how all this comes together to benefit their bottom line. If you were to talk to your colleagues in the Gatton College of Pharmacy, they have a pretty good sense of where their budgets are developed, how those budgets align to strategic plans, and what they have to do to grow revenues to do whatever it is that they outline as their priorities. If we move to RCM or some form of decentralized budgets and empower the deans to make localized decisions, then I think that will also facilitate ownership of this mission. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment on the vision and that you had on that previous slide. And one of the things that disturbs me, and you've heard a little bit from me in the past, is that it feels like academics are the last thing they're getting the attention. As much as we hear again and again that budgets are bad, we see position after position in administration being filled. We see money being spent on all kinds of things. And I look at that vision, and I have no problem with stewardship of place. I believe in student success. I believe in enhancing quality of life. There's nothing there that says we're an educational institution. Where is education? Where are academics in our vision? And that's the thing that makes it harder and harder for me as a faculty member to be willing to be flexible, to be willing to do more with less that you're asking me to do. You want us to recruit as faculty members. Where does my workload change as a faculty member? I feel like, again and again, and I'm an English professor, so I'm obsessed with language too. So that's, you know, you have a little bit there with that. We're not even an educational institution dedicated to this. Where's what's happening in the classroom for our students? Where's the transformation that takes place? Yes, I want them to succeed. Yes, I want to enhance quality of life. Yes, I want to have a good stewardship of the place. I'm here, I'm committed, I love this place. But what about the actual education, and where is that in the mission?
I understood. And for me, it's inherent. It's the central principle that underlies all of this. When I talk about a university experience, it's the learning that occurs in the classroom, it's the engagement with faculty, it's research. I didn't state it, and that's why this is just a draft. It's a draft to spark this conversation, and this will change. It probably will look different than the words here that are on the screen, but I did not include that language because for me it's a given. And that's an oversight.
Well, and the way that decisions seem to be made and the priorities that seem to have been in place from my personal perspective since you've come into office makes it feel like academics are sort of the last thing on the list, and they're why we're here. I mean, I would hope as faculty, right? And so it shouldn't just be implied. It should be central.
I don't disagree.
On this slide, do you have, like in the spirit of this slide, any concept of how many, what a goal number of faculty per FTE is?
Those are all things that will emerge through the strategic planning process. What I'm hoping to do today is to begin a conversation that will launch a strategic planning process for the campus. And I'll talk more about that during the State of the University address. But in terms of the detailed elements of how we get here and what's the responsibility of each college or department, that wasn't my intent. I'm not that far down the road in terms of homework, because that's work that needs to be done as a campus. This was just an effort today to spark a conversation. I mean, this wasn't developed by Dr. Bach or Bishop or Mike Hoff. This was just the way I examine numbers and what could be some potential aspiration goals for the campus.
I wanted to share two stories that have to do with the part of that was with alum as well as with education. We had an alum come back to our campus this past semester, and one of the things that he asked myself as well as the alumni office was, one of the things that what he would really like is what he thought alum would appreciate is say like a 10 or 15% discount card for the bookstore, because alum like to buy things and books. And it sort of dovetails into another thing that we really tried very hard in our department to get the bookstore to order the several books that our faculty have published. And many of them have, you know, they're not super technical books. Some of them, one of them is on country music. I've written on Tennessee Williams. And so it's like, when I've been to open houses and I've gone into the bookstore, there's all these parents and all these people in the bookstore, and there's no or very few faculties, their books on the shelf. There's that little tiny section, faculty books. And I just think that that sends this really strange message that we're not researchers. And I think those little things are things that don't really cost us any money. And I know the bookstore is technically private. It doesn't cost us much, yet it can give the community and the alum more of a buy-in.
It's a great point.
A section of, this is our celebrating authors, you can buy their book if you know. Or here's a discount card. You've donated money, here's a discount card.
It's a great idea, and I was running to take a note, but Dr. Jones, I hope you got that. If you're watching still at your computer, I haven't put you to sleep yet. Well, let me then jump into a couple of updates on other topics, and hopefully today begins a conversation that can continue throughout the fall. I want to give an update on a couple of items. related to capital construction. The first is an update on the Arts Initiative, and then to give information on some construction projects that may evolve over the course of the next year. On the Arts Initiative, we have moved through the engineering review and evaluations of site options. Architects are working with us now on programming. To date, we've raised $7.6 million, and I'm very hopeful that when the governor releases his capital budget, that we'll be included on that capital budget for funding from the state. For the first time ever, this project was on the list that THEC submitted to the governor for his consideration, and I'll get more into the arts in a second. The students are going to talk a great deal in the spring semester around renovations to the CULP. The students have raised a number of questions related to food service options, meeting spaces, but their desire is to create a central point of convening. The president described it as a living room for the university yesterday. So you're going to see the students have conversations around a dedicated fee to support debt service, to do some renovations, and to put an addition on this building, primarily focused on enhancing food service options, because there's just simply not a lot of places upstairs and the space is tight. But that's something that the students, I anticipate, are going to talk about in the spring. Center for Interprofessional Education is a building on the VA campus, Building 60, that will be the home for interprofessional education, for nursing, for public health, for pharmacy, and for medicine. The next bullet is Greek housing transition to Buck Ridge. So the sororities that are currently in Lucille Clement will move from dedicated space there to space up at Buck Ridge, which is a little bit more attractive and provides opportunities for growth there, and then planning design for football facilities. The campus master plan was approved by the State Building Commission on the 11th of December, and the approval was for alternate 1 and alternate 2 for the fine and performing arts facility, an opportunity for a parking facility here, new academic facility here, and then opportunities in time for renovations to each of the entities highlighted in blue. I mentioned the fine and performing arts, and I want to go into detail because I know that there are a number of questions from faculty in the arts about this building and where it may not be and where it is, and I'd like to use this to answer questions and also dispel myths. So these are the 2 locations that are under consideration for the facility. Location 1 is here in front of Dossett Hall, adjacent to Governor's and Centennial in that parking lot. Option 2 is on what's referred to in the papers and by myself as Lot 1. It's the building next to the Millennium Center. The programming that was moved forward to the board for the board's approval is for a $40 million building, two possible locations, space between 80 and 130,000 square feet. Those were the rooms. It was approved by the Building Commission. The Building Commission approved the site location, but programming to date has yet to be approved by the Board of Regents. And I draw your attention to the 80 to 130,000 square feet. When this building went onto the capital projects list 20 years ago, it went in at a level that was here. Costs per construction were different where they are now. Cost for construction for a building of this size is about $300 a square foot. So as construction costs have escalated, but the total dollar amount here really hasn't moved that much, essentially we're having a conversation with the architects of what are the things that can fit within the prescribed space and the resources that are available from the state. What we've had a conversation as a faculty and as a campus and as a community around are what are the things that do not exist on campus at this time. This is the largest room on campus. When we have full performance band on this stage, it's tight. All of us have had the opportunity to watch theater performances in Bud Frank. That building is in need of significant renovation. This provides a new home for theater. Our aerial dance, our students who are studying aerial dance at this institution study, train, and learn in a setting that's separated from the gymnasium of Brooks Hall by chicken wire. Our facilities are antiquated. So as we've examined the major gaps on campus, the major gaps are in recital hall space, theater space, and concert space. There are also major gaps for aerial dance. And then given that this is a home for the arts, the thought is to include all of the facets of the arts at the university, not one at the expense of another. We've not made formal decisions on what's in and what's out, and we've not put pen and paper together. We're at the programming phase. Once the programming is approved, then we select design architects. We're, as a campus, trying to work through, do we want a 3-bedroom house or a 4-bedroom house? We've not determined who gets a new bedroom and who doesn't. We've not determined where in the house the bedrooms will be located. All the academic programming phase is centered upon is what are the purposes that we need to meet within the building. So for some who have said, this department's out, or we're building a 1,500-seat large hall because Brian Nolan wants to placate Johnson City, that's not the case. We're working through what fits within the building given the existing square footage. There may be an opportunity when the building is designed formally by design architects, for the technical phrase is value engineering, but if we can find $1, $2, $3 million in efficiencies, then some things that may not be in the programming phase could work their way back in the design phase. But then there's also here a phrase around renovations. So that's the building as it stands now. 750 seats is what we've been approved to construct by the state. If we go over that number, we only go over that number with a significant partnership with Johnson City. And here's the procedural steps that we need to move through. We have to purchase lot 1. We have to knock down the bank building. We'll need costs associated with additional operating and maintenance if we go to a larger area. Issues around floodplain, and then we've got to get students back and forth across the bridge. If we increase the size, you see the steps from the city's perspective. The Bank of Tennessee, Washington County, and the Washington County Economic Development Authority, who've already stepped forward in terms of support. Here's a final element of those steps, and then I'm going to pause. Well, let me get to here, and then I'll pause for questions, and then I'll get to the last slide. Governor approved planning and design. It's been approved by the Building Commission. It's been presented to THEC. You can see all the elements. The hope is it's fully funded in the 2015 legislative session. My perspective on this building is we've waited 40 years for this thing. I'd love to have $80 million to build a building that encompasses every aspect of the institution. But we have a $40 million facility of which we have to raise $9.5. So as we're looking at fundraising, that fundraising is increasingly dependent upon our community partners. So when I've talked about building a facility that meets the needs of both the university and the community together, that language is intentional because the community is stepping forward with $10 million in resources to cover their portion of the match. So if there's been questions around language, the language is intentional because community support is required from a fundraising perspective. And I also think through community support, we have the opportunity to grow the university. I'd be happy to take questions on the arts building, and then I'll want to move to a few other discussion items, being mindful of time. Questions on the arts?
For comparison, can you tell us the capacity? For comparison, can you tell us the capacity of this co-auditorium?
870 some seats.
A little over 900.
A little over 900. Anita, thank you. A little over 900.
But I also think it's important to know that this stage size that we deal with on a regular basis is only about 850 square feet at the maximum right now with extensions on it. That is completely not normal for performance and teaching the students in both music and theater. The normal stage size that they should be working on is 3,000 square feet plus. And that's where we're really running into big problems. That and what's behind the stage. There's nothing behind the stage really to work with. So just a little more information.
Then transitioning to the last slide. What I'd like to do is to give a couple of updates on each of these elements, because these are elements that either we will spend a great deal of time discussing in the spring, or they were elements that were points of conversation in the fall. The first is the equity plan for 2015-16. We are working through the data specifics. We are waiting to see what comes forward with respect to the governor's budget. I cannot forecast whether or not the governor's budget will include salary enhancements, but we will submit to the Board of Regents fee increases to support equity pay for 15-16. We will submit to the Board of Regents fee increases to support equity pay for 15-16. We submitted fee increases last year for one-time bonuses. They were rejected by the board. This year we will submit again, but they will be equity rather than one-time and base. So I know there have been many who have said, well, why haven't we submitted recommendations to the board for a bonus? We did. We submitted it last year. It was rejected. So this year we will go back to the board, and rather than a bonus, it will be an investment in equity pay. I don't know the numbers. I don't have the details worked out, but you have my commitment that we will make a strong point of advocacy to the Board of Regents for investment in equity pay for the 15-16 academic year. Office of Information Technology. We sent an email to the campus as a whole earlier this month related to OIT. With Mark Bragg's retirement, I feel it's incumbent upon the institution to examine the structure, purpose, and function of OIT, and to look at opportunities to enhance services. I've spent a fair amount of time reviewing EAB reports, examining 27 institutions across the South, and looking at emerging best practices as it relates to technology. To whom does OIT report? Some suggest it reports to the Chief Fiscal Officer, other to the Provost, other to the President. Research indicates if it reports to the Provost, support for OIT increases. If it reports to the Fiscal Officer, it goes down. And if it reports to the President, it remains constant. So we're looking at reporting structure. Do we have a designated CIO that reports to the President? How does, for me, the real question isn't to whom does it report, what do we call it? It's what do we want to accomplish? I feel we would be well served as a campus if we examine technology, not for technology purposes, but technology to serve the education, research, and service functions of the university. Some institutions have merged all three of those under one umbrella. I welcome your emails or thoughts on how we structure this. We formed a committee led by faculty, comprised only of faculty, that met in November, that made their recommendations to me prior to the break. They made recommendations related to the development of a CIO. They made recommendations related to a customer service orientation. But I think the question that we will examine as a campus in the next 3 weeks, but we need to make a decision soon, is what's the mission of OIT? And I think the mission is to serve the educational needs, the research needs, and the service needs of the university. So we're going to talk a lot in the next month about OIT. There's been a lot of conversation in the community around campus safety. We're going to do a great deal of education outreach and healing work with respect to the things that have occurred and will continue to occur on this campus, be it in anything related to campus safety, but particularly with sexual assault and domestic violence. We made a decision in the summer to be more transparent in the manner in which we report sexual assault on campus. That decision brought the issue of campus safety to the forefront. I think we're a better university because we've had a serious reflection on who we are, how we report, when we report, and what that means. Beginning this month, effective at the end of this month, we bring Jackson Katz in, who's our first featured speaker, who will kick off a semester and then a year-long focus on sexual assault, domestic violence, education, outreach, healing, and prevention. This isn't just a topic that we're discussing here. I mean, if you've read the Rolling Stone articles on UVA and you followed the press at all, this is a national conversation. But I want to commend Joe Sherlin and the campus as a whole for getting ahead of the curve. We made a decision to be aggressive in our reporting, to be transparent in our reporting. Not every institution in the state of Tennessee made that decision. And as a result, the things that our incidents spiked. For me, it's not how many are reported. The real issue is how many are not reported. And if by changing the culture of reporting, we've made it safe for someone to come forward and talk about the things that have happened to them, then we've partially done our job. And this is something we're going to talk about at length throughout the semester, but I just wanted to draw attention to why there was the alerts, to why there was the articles in the newspaper. That was the result of an intentional decision that we made. And you'll see other institutions following suit. Talked a lot about communications. I welcome ideas on how we can continue to improve communication across campus, both internal and external to the community as a whole. We're going to talk some this semester about adjusting university governance structures. We had a retreat of the deans in November, early December. My dates have all kind of run together. In Greenville, we had a follow-up conversation on Monday. There are a number of structures and committees that exist on campus because they've always existed. I think we need to look at why things exist and maybe create some interim governance structures and move forward until we can finalize the master plan and finalize the budget. I anticipate that we'll create an interim governing entity that will replace President's Council, and that will replace the Monday morning senior staff meeting, and that will replace the University Planning Committee, bringing those three entities together to increase faculty participation in conversations, to increase the number of chairs at the table, deans at the table. We have all these structures, but Structure A doesn't talk to Structure B, which doesn't talk to Structure C, and I think we need to adjust structure if we're going to improve communication. So we're going to have conversations in the next couple of months about some interim governance structures and what that should look like. Last fall, we put a survey out across campus, Great Colleges to Work For, which is a climate survey in many respects, and our response rates were very low, to say the least. We will participate in Great Colleges to Work For again, and I encourage everyone to fill out the survey. We cannot make decisions at the institution without data. We cannot make decisions on anecdote, and the beauty of Great Colleges to Work For is it allows us to compare faculty engagement, satisfaction, a host of indicators against national metrics, so we can see how we stack up against other institutions. So when the call for participation, it's electronic, just go on the web and fill out the form. Please take the survey, because the results of the survey will make it a stronger campus. Presidential Fellows Program. One of the suggestions that has come through meetings with faculty across the fall is the need to create an internal fellowship program similar to ACE for ETSU faculty. How can a faculty member have the opportunity to do a one-year fellowship in an administrative position to get a sense of the issues, the decisions that are made across spectrums of the university, to have that year experience and then to return to the faculty. We've got to work through some of the elements related to cost share, buyout time, so that a faculty member is able to step away from their teaching responsibilities during the fellowship period. But we will hammer a lot of that out, and I'll announce it at the State of the University address in detail. But I think we'll be a stronger university if we develop some internal professional development. A lot of schools do this. So it's a fellowship program for faculty to take a year away from the classroom and to serve in an administrative capacity or in a support capacity for an area that aligns with their interests. The next is Mountain States and Wellmont. If you follow the newspaper, you're well aware that there's been a great deal of conversation regarding the Wellmont Health System around its solicitation for strategic partners. Wellmont had anticipated that they would make a decision around strategic partnership prior to the break. They've extended the date for the deadline. I've been pretty vocal, and I know not everyone in the room has agreed with this, but I've been vocal that we as a university would be stronger if those two health systems came together, rather than seeing those two health systems merge with entities from Virginia, North Carolina, or California. Those are community hospitals. They were built by the members of our community, many of whom are in this room or have been on our faculty. We've grown physical therapy, pharmacy, medicine together with the healthcare system. And one of the things that has been discussed at length by Mountain States is the opportunity to truly create an academic healthcare system with dedicated research dollars coming to East Tennessee State University to support the teaching and research of our faculty. Depending upon the day that I have had a chance to converse with Alan Levine, who is just a wonderfully dynamic person. We are fortunate to have him in East Tennessee. But Alan has committed between $10 and $15 million annually, new revenue, not existing, to support research and faculty on our campus. So there is a lot at stake in these conversations for the institution, but there's a lot at stake for us personally because all of us rely upon these healthcare systems for our personal health care. Athletics, I have athletics up for one simple reason. I made a commitment when we initiated football that the $800 and some thousand that was available for the university to invest on athletics below the cap. So let me phrase this a different way. There's a TBR mandated cap on the amount that you can spend out of general state operating dollars on athletics. When we started football, we were $800,000, give or take, below that cap. And I made the commitment to faculty that we would not move that number, that we would not shift instructional resources to the athletic side of the house. You can check the books, you can check the audits. That shift has not occurred, that shift will not occur. But the landscape of athletics is changing. And this is something that's got to not only impact us, it's going to impact every university across the country. As the Big Five, ACC, SEC, et cetera, are meeting now, the NCAA is meeting now, they're looking towards permissive legislation. They're looking towards total cost of attendance. There's an arms race that's occurring at the big level of Division I athletics that's going to ripple across all institutions. I'm not wanting to spend a lot of time on this today, nor do I want to spend a lot of time as a whole talking about athletics. We're here because we're an academic institution. It's only on the screen because this is going to be something that as a system of higher education institutions across the country, there's going to be a lot of conversation because of the changes that are occurring at the NCAA level. And then the last thing that I wanted to just provide a quick update on is marketing recruitment plans to support the George L. Carter scholarships. I think we have an opportunity to offset the loss in students, to increase the portfolio from an academic perspective, preparation-wise, of our students through growth in Asheville, Greenville, and Spartanburg. We'll move then to Charlotte, and we'll move then to Atlanta. But we will be aggressive and intentional in our marketing, and hopefully in the fall, you'll see our enrollment from those areas increase. This is not revenue that we shifted from one side of the ledger to the other. Faculty have asked me, well, Dr. Nolan, where'd you find the $15,000 to create these scholarships? This is not a shift of revenue from one pot to another. This is a tuition discount. So if a student from A.C. Reynolds High School comes to ETSU because of the Carter Scholarship, that's $8,000 in revenue that we will receive as a result of their enrollment. We discounted $15,000 to get them here, but it's adjusting that sticker price to help grow and diversify our enrollment base. So I want to be clear, we're not shifting resources from one side of the ledger to the other. We're scholarshiping, i.e. discounting tuition, to bring students to the institution. Now let's be honest about this. For those of you who know the university and who've done your homework, we were already doing this. It was a regional tuition discount. And what we said to students is if you have a 3.0 and a 22, we'll waive your tuition and fees. Waiving fees does not carry the significance of a scholarship. The bottom line impact on the university is not altogether dissimilar. What we've done is expanded the geographic circumference from border counties to 250 miles and changed what was heretofore a waiver to a scholarship. But the ability to walk into a high school and say to a parent, if you come to East Tennessee State University, we're going to give you a $60,000 scholarship over the 4 years that your student is enrolled, is a pretty powerful communication tool. And we're going to support that with boots on the ground, and I've referenced my visits to those 3 areas. So ladies and gentlemen of the faculty, these were some of the elements that I wanted to walk through. I apologize that I've run us a little over time, My hope is that today begins a conversation. It cannot be one way. I make mistakes all the time. Many of you in the room have called me on the carpet for my mistakes. Many of you in the room have been very vocal in your difference in the way you view the world than I. We have to continue that debate. We'll be stronger because of our difference. So we have to continue to converse, to debate, and to disagree. In the end, we'll find consensus. And consensus may not look anything like the numbers I outlined. The language will look different. Language is important. Unless you get the language right, nothing else will follow. So I humbly submit to you that I have made mistakes, and I'm going to continue to make them, just as we all will. But if we work together and overcome our faults, I think we can do anything. I'm excited about what's to come. I'm excited by Promise, because Promise has forced us to have a conversation about who we are and how we convey to students and parents the excellence of the education that we provide in our classroom. Students come here for a reason. I had a business person say to me, well, Brian, if the only reason people come to my restaurant is because it's close and cheap, my business model is broken. People come here because of the quality of the service and the quality of the experience. If the only reason people come to an institution is because it's close and cheap, we've got bigger problems. People come to this institution because of the quality of the educational experience that they have here. That's a great, great story to tell, and I'm honored to be a part of it. I thank you all for allowing me to go a little bit over time, and I hope that we can continue this conversation throughout the spring and the fall. For chairs who are in the room, I welcome invitations to come to departmental meetings. For deans who are in the room, I thank you for your work in putting a lot of this material together. I hope everybody has a great semester.